Hello and welcome to today's IndustryWeek webcast on growth strategies presented by PwC and sponsored by Epicor. My name's Steve Minner. I'm the executive editor of IndustryWeek. We'll take care of a few housekeeping issues first. If you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please press the help button on your player console to receive assistance in solving common issues. If at any time you're having difficulties with audio or slides advancing, simply hit your F5 button to refresh your webcast console. Let me explain how you can participate in today's presentation. We welcome your questions during today's event. In order to submit your questions to today's presenters, simply type your question into the question window on the left-hand side of your screen and then hit the Submit button. We'll be answering as many questions as possible during the question and answer session that will follow the main presentation, but please feel free to send in your questions at any time and we'll add them to the queue. On your console, the logos of our sponsor and our presenters are hot linked. If you want to visit either website during this webcast, you can click on a logo and a new window will open. This will not take you out of the webinar. Please also be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available on the IndustryWeek website within the next week for you to review. You'll be notified by email when the archive is available. Now let me introduce today's presenters from PwC. Jon Ranke is an international tax partner and a member of PwC's Global Value Chain Transformation Team. He has 32 years of experience and has held a variety of positions within the U.S. International Tax Services practice, including the National Practice Leader, leader of the U.S. Value Chain Transformation practice, and leader and co-founder of the Vision practice dedicated to delivering effective tax rate reduction to complex multinational companies. He specializes in leading large-scale strategic tax optimization engagements for multinational companies that are designed to deliver long-term tax efficiency through the implementation of business alignment, foreign tax reduction, and cash redeployment structures. Michael Kinder is a director with PwC's Strategy and Consulting practice and brings more than 11 years of manufacturing, supply chain, and operations strategy experience across the industrial, energy, and aerospace sectors. Prior to joining PwC, he held various management positions across manufacturing, materials, and global sourcing at General Electric in the consumer and industrial and energy businesses. Becky Hudson is a senior associate with PwC US based in Chicago. She's a team leader within PwC's Competitive Manufacturing Center of Excellence and a thought leader on manufacturing strategy and digital manufacturing topics. Becky has led multiple operations strategy engagements focused on technology transformation, quality management, network strategy, and manufacturing turnaround. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jon.
I think, Mike, do you want to say a few words?
Yes, thank you for the introduction. So just for the benefit of the audience, first of all, thank you guys for joining today. Hopefully you find our presentation both interesting and informative for your own application and your own companies. We're going to spend about 45 minutes here on the core content and try to leave a good 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions and answering. So feel free to submit your questions as we go forward. We're going to cover all three of the topics here that we've outlined in our thought leadership piece that we published. Before we do so, Becky's going to give a quick overview of some of the context behind this. So hopefully that's helpful before we jump into the three strategies that we're going to discuss. So with that, Becky, why don't you take us through the first few slides?
Great, thanks Mike. Good afternoon everybody, thanks for joining. So I would like to get us started today by really framing our discussion around a lot of the macroeconomic trends that are really impacting manufacturers today. So the truth is, across the board, the economy is slowing down and companies really can no longer grow their way out of challenges. So what does this mean? It really does mean that they need to rethink the way that they're operating. The next thing we're seeing is demand is shifting to new markets, so companies are playing in locations where they've really never been before, and they're also getting introduced to new competitors and new challenges when it comes to pricing pressure. So in addition to this changing location, you actually have increased changing preferences and also requirements. So complexity is continuing to increase more and faster than we've seen in the past. So when we think about companies' manufacturing facilities, they were developed in a way that they could serve mass production. So they were producing a standard product, pumping it out the door, but now they're stepping back and realizing that they're in an environment where they need to produce highly customized products in lot sizes of 1. So on top of that, we have the Amazon effect. Customers want things faster and more customized than they've ever asked for before. So that leads us to a challenging position. So when we think outside of the 4 walls of that facility, we look at our footprints. And companies have these legacy footprints where they weren't really developed with today's economic picture in mind. They were developed, as I mentioned, to really serve those customers where they were when they were created. So this leads us to reconsider how can we serve those new customers in those new locations. The next item we really hear a lot about is the labor wage differential. So it's narrowing. It's a situation where those economic impacts and those things that we've been able to enjoy by operating in low-cost countries really are becoming eroded. That value is decreasing year over year. And finally, as we all know, the oil price fluctuations are impacting us every day. It's really making it challenging for manufacturers to plan for what a normal cost of doing business really is. So the next thing here is really, what does this mean for all of us? In truth, and as you're all living it, it's a very challenging time for manufacturers. So companies are finding themselves at the center of this juggling act where there are these 3 buckets and overarching themes, the first of which is cost pressure. So as we just discussed a couple minutes ago, we see that there are shifts in demand that are very common. So this means that we're not able to fully utilize our capacity, and that capacity is inconsistent. Productivity has not increased. A very powerful statement that was made recently by one of our clients is that if you neutralize the past 10 years' performance for technology improvements, productivity has not changed at all. So this leaves companies with the need to find creative ways to increase their productivity, but they're still needing to balance against those labor wage differentiation that we just spoke of. Jumping down to the left there, when it comes to supply volatility, commodity prices are continuing to fluctuate, and this is of course in line with volatile fuel prices that we're seeing, an introduction of new types of products that we discussed. And with customers wanting their products faster than ever before, this naturally is driving up our freight prices. And a thing that we always consider is that, of course, global companies are at the risk of different supply disruptions, natural disasters, key competitors or suppliers with challenges of their own. But now we're in a position with these even wider networks of ours. That means that we have suppliers that are spread out even more, and they're also in places that we haven't ever dealt with. So another factor to consider is challenges with customs and, of course, those different natural disasters that may arise. This finally brings us over to the growing complexity, and it truly underpins everything we're discussing today. So the customized products and the customers with high demands, they're really continuing to expand our product portfolios. The result, sometimes we don't always think of, is our SG&A costs are driving up because we have the need for more engineers, more designers, a different type and different locations for R&D effort to support that product customization that we're now telling our customers will provide them. And with those promises to customers, they're also looking for specialized knowledge to support them. They're very aggressive in their customer service expectations, and that's something that we're finding ourselves needing to respond to as well. That brings us to our first polling question. So we're interested in knowing which of those challenges we just went through is currently the top priority for your company. And although each of these items we discussed on the previous slide is something that we're seeing are, pinning off of each other, Mike, I'm interested, which of these ones are you getting asked by your clients the most to help them with?
Good question, Becky. So we'll wait for the poll results to come in. It depends, is always the answer. But they're all related. I would say probably the one that we get inquired most specifically about is the growing complexity. The cost pressure isn't a new thing. Supply volatility isn't a new thing. There's new twists on these naturally, but it's this lot size of one demand that you've alluded to in these introductory slides that is driving a lot of changes in the operating model. So in how do you deal with that on the shop floor? How do you deal with that through your supply chain, through the distribution process? It's really about managing this more finite batch sizes, I think, is probably where we're seeing most of the inquiries.
All right, thank you. So I'll just give it a couple more seconds. All right, so it looks as though we're spread quite evenly across the cost pressure and all of the above, but as you can see, these are things that definitely are impacting companies quite substantially in different areas. Okay, so for those of you who were discussing cost pressure, and those of you who are discussing all of the above, you're certainly not alone. And some of the things we wanted to take a brief moment to talk through are how can you address these complexities. So simply put, companies can really think about their strategies and how they can address those challenges in three different buckets. So we have our operating costs, you have your asset productivity, and you have revenue lift. And when it comes to improving the bottom line for that 30% or so of you that said cost pressure is really challenging, some of the levers to consider are how can you improve your SG&A and labor, but of course balance that against how you support growth enablement. How can you reduce your direct labor cost, and how can you induce your inventory? When we jump down to asset productivity, and for that smaller amount of you that said supply volatility, but also related to the cost pressure and of course all of the above, there's a huge opportunity in asset productivity. One of the facts that we like to state is that this can make up as much as 40% of a company's cost. So it's really important to think through how can you eliminate your non-productive time, how can you increase your scale and your production flexibility, and how can you improve product reliability. And the reason why these are so critical is because increased asset productivity is translating directly back to return on invested capital. So that's really going to enable you to redeploy your capital in areas that you want to focus on, which then leads us down to revenue lift. So companies can get ahead by reducing their time to market, providing higher customer service, introducing flexibility to their pricing, improving their agility and quality, among many other things as well. So all of this listed here just gives you a snapshot of how you might consider addressing these challenges you're facing. So the next thing I wanted to discuss is we've just seen in black and white that there are lots of ways to consider how we can approach resolving these challenges, but the truth is when it comes to developing this strong manufacturing strategy, companies are really forced to find a way to stay competitive, but they're balancing these fundamental economics against these continually changing market requirements. So that really breaks down in the left here to two different considerations. And the first one is your asset forward capabilities. So what do you as a company have at your disposal? How are you currently operating today? And what are you dealing with to serve your customers? Over on the right there, we see that there's these market-backed requirements. What is it that the customers are demanding? Some of the companies are considering things that we see in the middle here. So should you make versus buy? Should you then, how can you scale your manufacturing to better utilize what you have? And then tax is the third item here. So tax is going to be always impacting your true bottom line. When we shift over to the right side of the page there, we've seen that companies are successful when they think through these three different strategies, the first of which is an asset-light footprint. How can you as a company achieve that expanding network of yours and have that distributed footprint but not incur a huge capital outlay? The second item we see here is digital operations. So as we expand and we're getting, spread more globally than we've ever been before, how can you keep tabs on those operations that are happening in those discrete manufacturing locations? The third item here is tax. It underpins every decision, or it certainly should, which we'll have Jon speak to you about a little bit later. And tax considerations really should be central to any manufacturing footprint strategy. So to take us a little bit deeper into those first two items there, I will reintroduce you back over to Mike Kinder. Mike, turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Becky. Fantastic. So Becky took everybody through the background and context, fed you a bit of medicine here to set the table on these three topics we're going to discuss. And I'll tell you, so the rest of this presentation isn't going to be, about sort of the traditional methods to drive cost out or improve flexibility. So it's not going to be about a low-cost footprint or strategic sourcing, anything like that. What we intend to do here is to discuss these three topics, which I wouldn't call provocative, but are a little bit more out of the box. They're more emerging, and so hopefully you find them interesting and compelling. So I'm going to start with the asset-light idea of a footprint. So this is starting kind of from a strategic footprint, but even more focused on what do we mean by a strategic asset-light footprint. And so rather than go through a bunch of frameworks and things on how to think about this, we're going to walk you through a real client example so you can see how this was conceived. And spent a lot of time focusing on this market back implications sort of driving that strategy. So a manufacturing footprint can take many flavors. Obviously there's no right answer to your manufacturing footprint. There's a lot of options, and this is one way a company tackled it. So just a little background. We did a project with this company. The goal here was to capture more market share. It's industrial equipment, heavy industrial equipment. So not a lot of kind of overall market growth here. It's a pretty slow growing, pretty mature market. So the name of the game is taking market share. And so they, one of the biggest struggles they were having is around customer delivery requirements. And this was long lead times, low on-time delivery. This client in particular was losing ground to a number of kind of regional players that were able to get to market faster, go to market with a lower cost, this type of thing. So market share was being eroded, and looking for new ways to kind of regain and take that market share back. So there were a lot of market feedback coming back about this lead time issue, customer service issue. So the natural first lever was to think about it in terms of inventory. What can we do to stock our products more strategically, improve our availability, lower lead times through inventory. Due to the amount of customization, and we're talking all make-to-order products, it didn't work. So the company came back and said, what else can we do here? So the approach was to take a market back approach. I mean, first step is to look at current performance and current customer demands. So the first stage of this, and we'll talk a bit more about what this looks like, was to kind of assess a baseline performance against what are the market expectations. So then that leads us to this third bullet point about now structuring your value chain, which we'll call an engineered value chain in this example, to deliver on market expectations by product, by region. And what that naturally entails is a lot of restructuring on the manufacturing footprint and supply chain. One of the key elements to success here is the idea of postponement. So if you have a lot of complexity in your product, and that complexity is inherent in value add because it's driving, it's based on certain customer needs in certain regions, certain applications, you have to live with that complexity. So how do you manage that? And how do you drive out the unnecessary cost and complexity that comes with it? And then to kind of round out the business case, after we determine what the customer requirements were, what do we need to do to fulfill that, then what is the potential associated with that? So what is the value of 1% increase in market share over baseline? And in this case, we scoped it at an 8% market share opportunity if we get this right. So moving on to just illustrate the baseline findings. And I'll touch a little bit on the customer segmentation, but we'll drill into that a little bit more in a few slides. But what we found out is just the current structural limitations were not allowing our client to meet market needs. On the left side, so the blue bars here are customer expectations. The red bars are baseline findings, what the company was doing. And these are mirror images of each other. The top one is for a model number, we'll just call it Model 1, and the bottom one is for Models 2, 3, and 4. But thematically, it's about, it's a similar relationship. So what we noticed in the blue bars is that there's really 4 main archetypes of customers, end customers. There's the reactive taker. This is the farthest one on the left. This is the kind of project-oriented customer that needs a piece of equipment now, not too picky about the type of equipment as long as it meets some of the basic requirements. The main priority is around how quickly can I get it. The second one is this is the reactive demanding customer. So also probably a project-oriented customer, lead time very important, but also has a number of, table stakes around the design, very specific things they need. So there's one level of customization up, but also a high priority around time to market. After that, we have the third one is the proactive customer. And the proactive customer is usually pretty traditional CapEx plans, a little more longer-term outlook on the CapEx spend, more likely to wait a little bit more for that higher level of customization. And then the final one is the custom design, and this is basically lead time independent, plenty of time to plan ahead, a lot of very specific requirements in the product, and like I said, lead time indifferent. But what you find is when we did the baseline is current performance wasn't really addressing any of these, except probably the custom design aspect. Everything was managed make to order centrally, and like I said, the client was dealing with long lead times that wasn't really successfully serving any of the preferences of the market. So just to double click on lead time, as I'm sure many on the phone deal with a lot of different steps in the make to delivery cycle. And most of the time, a big portion of this is in the sort of procurement through assembly, MRP-driven aspect, where if you have highly customized products, you spend a lot of time procuring customized components, and a lot of time on the manufacturing floor, interpreting engineering drawings and doing all that good stuff. So a lot of time on the availability and assembly side. But then, especially if you go to market through dealers, many steps to get the product to the end customer. So you complete the unit, you stage it for pickup, deliver it to port, wait for the freight, take it all the way by boat to the next port. It arrives at the dealer. The dealer has to pick it up, stock it, make any final customization or enhancements at the dealer, and finally deliver to the customer. All that ends up stacking up to be a very long time to market. So this gets us to the footprint consideration. So this is illustrative, obviously. So the point is, if you're managing all of this complexity in a global business and you're trying to get customized products to China, to Brazil, to Argentina, to India, all out of one central location, you're managing all that complexity through a centralized location. And the solution here, by segmenting the different customer types and the different requirements, we're able to work that back, hence the market back term, work that back through the value chain and engineer it appropriately to meet the needs of every market with those lower lead times. And the answer here, and this is what's illustrated in this page, is to balance the need for localization with the need for absorption and scale in the capital-intensive side of the operation. So by taking a platforming approach on the product side, we're able to determine, okay, what's core to these product lines? What would we call a structurally significant enhancement to the core product? And then what would we call an option or an attachment to the bolt-on, or to the structurally significant component? So 3 levels generally of customization. And so on the core product, this is really where 90% of your material and labor is consumed. And what we did is redirected a lot of the complexity away from these core operations facilities. In this case, it's illustrated by one there in, looks like Southern Europe, or Eastern Europe, and focus on building a more routine, repeatable, capital-intensive operation there, and then postpone that customization out into region. And this is represented by kind of a mini hub and spoke model within region. And so where this becomes asset light is when you think about the process of incorporating any of these options or attachments. It's a very asset light approach. It's usually not very capital intensive. So if you're talking about a car, for instance, this might be the type of tires. And so it's a matter of just how do we get that car over to point A and put the China preference tires on it in location A. So that's what we ended up doing. And so all of these smaller bubbles here they could represent something as simple as a warehouse, as simple as kind of a small assembly center. And they don't have to be big. It's not a matter of replicating all your manufacturing capabilities globally, but a matter of having these asset-light terminals, if you will, where you can incorporate that kind of tail end of the complexity, which is usually local products. So you're not bringing those local products back into your hubs. You're kind of keeping them local, components that is, and assembling on site. So you're saving in freight, you're saving in logistics, you're saving in coordination time, all of that good stuff. So that's what we mean by the asset light footprint. And so, as an option for your business, this has been very successful in the way in the instances where we've implemented such a thing. So just to round it out and bring it back to the market facing or market back aspect. So kind of core to manufacturing strategy, everybody's kind of dealt with make to stock, make to order, make engineer to order type considerations. But it was this segmentation, as I mentioned, the reactive taker, the reactive demanding, the proactive, and the custom design segmentation that allowed us to sort of plan, I guess, or engineer the value chain accordingly. And I think that pretty much wraps up the asset light section, and I'll just move into in the interest of time, move into the polling question. So the second polling question is just to see where everybody's at on this. What degree is your current footprint aligned to your key markets? So market back point of view? Do you feel like your footprint enables you to meet the needs of the market? Is it strategically aligned? Is it a design footprint? Would you say it's kind of well aligned but needs improvement? Is it adequate but not really strategic? Is it constantly sort of fighting to make the engine churn? Or is it poorly aligned and largely independent of the markets that you serve? So we'll take a minute or so to get the questions in. And I think, Becky mentioned it earlier, when it comes to manufacturing footprint, a lot of it is inertia. And so what we find is a lot of it, especially if you're growing by acquisition or if you've largely been attached to some specific markets, then, it's not uncommon to be a bit detached from your current markets or your sort of target markets in your growth strategy. So, we find this a lot, and it's hard to modify footprints. It takes a long time. You usually have to plan far ahead. Okay. So I think we probably have enough time. Let's see what the, okay. It's almost a bell curve here. We've got, many saying, it's adequate, but it's not strategic, and there's some on the other side of the bell curve. But I think this is about, what I would have expected, and probably what we see more often than not. So anyway, let's move on to the next topic. And the next topic, it really supplements the idea of the asset-light footprint. And one of the reasons why we tell this story this way is probably what's going through your mind is, with a really distributed footprint, there's more complexity that I have to manage. So I lose visibility, I lose that immediate control within the four walls of my plant. I now have to manage more on the distribution side of the house. And that's true. The new tool that is in the toolbox now is this idea of digital operations. So just spend a second on this framework here. We're seeing a lot of progress in this front over the last probably 1, maybe even 2 years, but it's still very nascent. It's a lot of inquiry. I think there's a lot of people seeing potential with digital operations, but really don't know where to start or how to apply relevant use cases. So what we want to do in this section is do a quick overview on what's at your disposal now and how do you enable something like a distributed footprint or a more global supply chain, etc. So we're seeing this converge around 7 different categories or archetypes of use cases. The first 2, 1 and 2 here, are more on the product or business strategy side. So you hear about connected products, digital business models. Most of the articles you read about Internet of Things, it's around sort of how do I connect my shoes to the Internet and get information about my running patterns and all that good stuff. But the same technology is enabling advancements, quick advancements in core operations. And we see this kind of gravitating around these different concepts. And one is next generation manufacturing, another is optimizing capital assets. The number 5 here is the smart supply chain and service. We have connected product development, and finally a kind of a technology backbone. Although the technology backbone, it kind of spans a lot of these things and underscores a lot of these categories. It can become its own animal, though, when you think about how do I integrate my legacy systems with, let's say, an IoT platform or some form of operational intelligence engine. Those become very important considerations, especially for any CIO or somebody involved in technology strategy. But I'm going to focus for the next few slides on number 3 and number 5, so to kind of reinforce our asset-light story. So real quick, just to define what we mean by digital manufacturing, there's a number of use cases that we would say falls under this umbrella. Some are broader and some are more narrow. On the broader side, there's this emerging capability of a connected factory. So connecting assets, people, material, all your legacy systems, getting all that information into one spot and being able to optimize within the 4 walls of your plant. Kind of like what you wished MES was always able to do for you. This is what's becoming a very real possibility with a number of these solutions that are emerging from the likes of GE or Rockwell Automation or Siemens and so on. Automation gets a little more narrow, but the advancements in robotics and cobotics, autonomous vehicles and autonomous robots, things like this, it's becoming more real by the day. So the advancements in robotics and automation fall into this category and becoming a little more practical for kind of a broader set of manufacturers. The next is additive manufacturing. So you're seeing a lot of industry literature around 3D printing, rapid prototyping. This is also evolving very fast. It's not so much just on the prototyping side. It's now very relevant for aftermarket and very available for aftermarket, spare parts, things like that, but also in production parts. So this is evolving very quickly. And then on the more narrow side, you've got these man-machine interface use cases, so augmented reality. So you've got a lot of kind of wearables, things like that, kind of emerging into the market right now. You've got enhancements to legacy MES software, you've got optics type solutions. I would call this a little more of a nuanced category, and so therefore I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by the connected factory. So real quick, on the connected factory, the middle illustration here is just meant to kind of serve as a straw man of the different workflow across the plant. So warehousing, fabrication, assembly, test, and then ship. And underneath that, you have a lot of enabling capability or requirements. So on the kind of receiving side, you've got all the planning, ordering, replenishment activities. Within fab, assembly, and test, you've got likely some capability to monitor and report and sense and actuate, so on. And then on the fulfillment side, you have kind of similar requirements on the receiving side, but plan, replenish, and so on. And enabling all of that, I'm sure many of you listening have discrete systems that enable these elements of the workflow. So customer relationship management, advanced planning tools, maybe MES or QMS in the shop floor. You've got maybe PLCs and SCADA on your machines. And then on the distribution side or the enterprise side, you've got an ERP kind of governing it all, or you've got a WMS that is enabling your distribution. And if you're like my legacy days in industry or many of my clients, these systems don't really talk to one another. You have to kind of use Excel tools to pull it all together and get intelligence for the entire ecosystem. So this is what we mean by this. What's new here is this digital factory engine, this sort of capture of the digital record, which allows you to optimize. And so why this is significant is it extends now beyond the plant and extends into the entire value chain. So we'll talk about what these use cases are next. So what you have in digital manufacturing now is a number of solutions and capabilities that target machine performance, material management, labor, and flow within the four walls of your factory, but flow outside of the four walls. So in things like around machines, you've got asset management capabilities, machine performance monitoring, all the predictive analytics and predictive maintenance now you can do on machines, fixed assets in your plant. On the material side, you've got real-time supply chain monitoring and visibility to what's coming in, what's going out. On the labor side, as I mentioned, operator enablement capabilities like wearables, augmented reality, all that. And then flow is where it all kind of comes together, because what this digital factory engine allows you to do now is you can, almost like a kind of a mass flow problem where you can identify where bottlenecks are forming. Analytics can help anticipate where those bottlenecks are going to form and alleviate those before it starts to disrupt your business. So thinking of the asset-light footprint then, if I extend it beyond the four walls of the plant and I look at this as a smart supply chain, what do I have? I've got real-time visibility and flow monitoring across the entire value chain. I can do a retrospective root cause analysis. I can do sort of predictive analysis on where my disruptions and volatility is. In terms of improved operations, I've got more integrated S&OP planning. So rather than kind of manually pulling together all of the dealer information and local sales information, you've got this now in a central repository for you to analyze all together in real data. And the benefits. So this is, higher margins and reduced costs, obviously, but I'd say the biggest value right now is the ability to improve the customer experience and become more agile and flexible in how you serve the customers. So back to the asset-light footprint, when it comes to end-to-end visibility and knowing your customer, it's all that information in one spot. That's how you can now do this a lot faster and more efficiently. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this or just go really quickly through this case study. Kind of a classic case study, represents really where a lot of the digital operations use cases are hitting right now. But auto supplier, a lot of failures, a lot of rework, a lot of waste on the shop floor, and introduced some machine intelligence and was able to sort of proactively anticipate machine failures and bottlenecks in the shop floor. And let me just say before we move on to the next polling question here, this kind of represents where a lot of the early adopters are in the digital operations maturity, is kind of targeting one specific issue and going after that one specific issue. So if you can harness all the information about your equipment and your shop floor, equipment performance, failures, bottlenecks, all of that, naturally you can see where the benefit is going to arrive. But what I can tell you is that the digital operations use cases span a lot more than that. So there's enterprise-wide opportunities. There are major strategic implications in how you can enable something to really transform your business model, like an asset-light footprint. So in this time, we didn't have a lot of time to cover all of those specific cases, but hopefully this gives you a little bit of a flavor on how all of these enablers are starting to come together for manufacturing, supply chain, product development, etc. Okay, so let's move on to this polling question. We'll do this one quickly, so then Jon can discuss the tax side. To what degree has your company digitized internal operations? So would you say, based on what we just talked about, not at all, a little bit, somewhat, mostly, or 100%? And if you're 100%, I would like to talk to you afterwards. Okay, so we'll just give this a minute. And like I said, we're still in the very early innings of this for digital operations, and we're starting to see a lot of interest and a lot of inquiry coming in about the potential, but we're probably seeing a lot more activity on the supply side. So I wouldn't be surprised if you're hearing from many of these solution providers that are entering the market and entering the market with a lot of investment, a lot of very cool technology. It can become a kind of a daunting landscape, but we expect in the next few years it to start shaking out with some really tangible case studies and some winners and some losers on the supply side. All right, so let's see where we're at here. Okay, so probably about what I expected too. So there's a lot of people saying minimally, and number 2 is about somewhat. So yeah, some progress that's consistent with what we're seeing. Okay, so let's switch gears just a little bit, and Jon can pick it up and talk about tax and value chain planning.
Thanks, Mike, and excuse me. Thanks, everybody. And as soon as Mike said tax, I'm mindful of the fact that looking at the nearly 1,000 registrations that none of you are tax people. So I don't want to be the first guy to lose a bunch of our participants here when we talk about taxes. Probably the last thing you want to be thinking about, other than on April 15th, when hopefully you file for your refund, is taxes. Unfortunately, we're in an environment today, as Mike and Becky discussed, there's growing complexity everywhere, not only in the supply chain and all of the decisions that we make, but certainly in the tax area. It's never been more complex than it is today, with a lot of competing jurisdictions trying to grab a piece of tax revenue that can feed these difficult to keep sated governments that are out there trying to get a lot of tax revenue. Now, with growing complexity usually comes a lot of risk, meaning there's some chances that we're going to run into pitfalls that if we're not careful, we're going to end up paying taxes that we don't need to. But with complexity also comes opportunity. So in the supply chain area and defining operating models and designing manufacturing footprints, I'm going to go to the punchline, which is taxes do matter. And when you make decisions along the lines of what Mike and Becky were discussing, whether where you're going to put your asset-light footprint for manufacturing and how you're going to run your digital business, what you do should be decided on an after-tax basis, because although you might look at things, and most operating people are going to look at things on a pre-tax basis, it could turn out, even on a pre-tax basis, you've got an optimal design. On an after-tax basis, it could be that all of those benefits that you've tried to build into your new model could dissipate. So I'm going to be very brief here because I'm mindful that we're going to run out of time and we do want to take a couple questions. But I want to give some very quick illustrations of what we take into account when we are working with companies to help them optimize their footprint, in particular with respect to manufacturing, operating model, and supply chain. So there's two different categories that we're mindful of in taxes. There's what we call indirect taxes, which tends to be value-added taxes, sales taxes, customs and duties we put into that same category. So indirect taxes is one. The other is direct taxes, which is our more traditional things that we think about. It's income taxes, similar to what we pay, which is the taxes that our corporations pay as well. So all of those ultimately have an impact on the bottom line. So if we incur taxes unnecessarily, we're going to end up with a suboptimal solution for our companies. So we need to take that into account. So what I want to do, as I mentioned, is just give a couple real quick illustrations of some examples that we've dealt with some of the clients out there. All right, that went too far. Hang on here. Okay, this first example, which has to do with indirect taxes, we had a client that came to us and said, we want to expand our footprint into Asia. We've got manufacturing in the U.S. We've typically exported from the U.S. into our foreign markets, but we need to expand our capacity. We don't have enough capacity in the U.S. to do that. Should we continue to manufacture in the U.S., or should we actually increase our footprint and put some local presence in the Asia market? So one of the key factors, obviously, what's the cost of labor, what's the cost of capital for doing business in all those locations, expansion versus of an existing factory with exports versus local production. So what this chart shows is really import duties that are born when the product that they were selling, which is a class of light recreational vehicles. On the left axis, you'll see these are manufacturing locations. So the company looked at, on the bottom, you'll see the USA as the production site, and then working to those other countries. What about if I produce in Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, India? What's along the top axis is the markets that they were selling into. And what's within the grid there are the customs and duties that are born when you import into those markets. So as an example, if I build a product in India and I export it into Malaysia, you'll see where they intersect there. Malaysia is going to, they are going to collect a 15% custom or duty. As you can see by the chart, if you look at Thailand, Thailand isn't a very friendly place to import this product into. So if you're producing in India or in Malaysia or in the U.S. and you're producing those products and you sell into Thailand, they assess a 60% duty. So all of this had to be taken into account, taking into account what quantities are going where until you get to a complete matrix. In the end, you could probably see that as you see the arrows down there, the current state at the bottom shows they're currently in the U.S. and they would be exporting into all these markets. You can see that there's just an egregious amount of customs and duties that would be imposed on that product by importing into all those Asian markets. As it turns out, the best location from a customs and duties perspective ended up being, actually no surprise, Thailand. If you build in Thailand and you export to these various markets, you're effectively, when you net it all out, going to incur the least amount of customs and duties. So for those of you who haven't done a lot of offshore production, or you haven't gone into some of these, in Asia are some of the toughest markets. Latin America is certainly very tough as well. You can see how these customs and duties have to be taken into consideration, because Thailand was not the lowest cost manufacturing location on a pre-tax basis, but when you took into account all these other considerations, especially customs and duties, it ended up being the best choice. So that's an example of indirect taxes. What I want to do is talk a little bit now real quickly about direct taxes or income taxes. And most folks that are in operations within the clients we work with, when they figure out, again, where to locate a plant, they don't think about direct taxes either. So it could be as simple as to say, well, what is the lowest cost manufacturing location that I can go to and pay the least amount of taxes? So in the example I've got here, I call it a traditional export model. And in country X, which is that box there with all the sub-boxes within it, the traditional export model is where we put in place, excuse me, a manufacturing location, and connected to that manufacturing is the procurement function that goes with acquiring the raw materials and components that go into manufacturing, the R&D of the product, the intellectual property that is owned from the IP or from the R&D, all is in one location. So we could look at optimizing the location of the manufacturing on an after-tax basis, taking into account, assuming that you're going to co-locate all of those items. What we've learned after a number of years is every one of these different components is a value driver, hence the concept of a value chain. So all of these different functions, whether it's procurement, R&D, intellectual property ownership, and obviously manufacturing, are all components of the value chain. By taking those components, each value chain component is associated with some allocation of income to that value chain component. If we can take those elements of income associated with the value chain and move them to various locations so that we can make decisions on each of these independently, maybe we can get not only an optimal operational solution, but an optimal tax solution. So it could be that the location of manufacture is not the optimal location for locating and owning our intellectual property. There could be incentives out there. It might be our research and development should be separate from where we own the intellectual property that's created. And certainly it could be that the procurement function, where do we put that center of excellence for procurement that's going to get our source of supply that goes into manufacture? We call this a value chain driven model. And what we do with our companies is we take each element of that value chain and make a location decision on each of those, taking into account not only the pre-tax but also the after-tax considerations. So without spending a lot of time here because we're running short, you can see what we did with this company is we split off those elements. So you see originally we had in country X, all of those value chain components were in one location. What we did is divided them all up, and we took the procurement function and put that into a location in country C where the tax rate was 10% lower than it was in country X. So we get some tax benefits there, as well as we got some good operational efficiencies. The next example, we actually split off the research and development and the intellectual property holding, and we put those in different jurisdictions. Now you see where we put the R&D actually ended up in a higher tax rate location, but this is why you got to do it on a pre-tax and an after-tax basis. It turns out that the cost of doing business and the quality of the individuals to perform the R&D was better in country A, so we moved them to country A, even though taking into account the 35% tax, that was a little bit of an inefficiency, but it was more than offset by the efficiencies. So anyway, we did that with all of these and ultimately even ended on a shared service center in country Z, which ended up at a 30% rate, but at extremely low cost of labor. So that's when your tax guys come in and they talk to you, these are some of those complexities. They're going to hopefully work their way through with you as you go through these footprint decisions. The important thing is to remember, get this under consideration quickly. After you've already done these things, it's extremely hard to change your footprint because you end up with things like exit taxes and charges from these jurisdictions. They don't want you to move out, so they charge you an exit tax. So that's kind of a flavor for that. We've got a tax question here. I guess we'll do that really. We've got about a minute. So when your company makes footprint decisions, are they calculated taking into consideration tax consequences? First answer is yes. Indirect taxes, which would be customs and duties, etc. Second is yes, income taxes only. Third is both income taxes and indirect taxes. Fourth one is no tax considerations are taken into account when you make these footprint decisions. And the last is unknown. So I'm really anxious for the answer here, Mike, so I'm going to use the extra 30 seconds and see what our group says. So.
No problem.
And after this, I don't know if we're going to have some time here. We covered a lot of material. We were hoping to open this up for some questions and answers. Mike, I'll turn it over to you real quick after this, and we'll see where we end up. So
I think we can probably fit one question in and wrap it up.
Wow, this is good. It's good to see that. So the group says 35% said yes, indirect taxes and income taxes. So. And then 50%, understandably, you may not be in the communication line where you would know ultimately how those decisions between alternatives are made. So, okay. Mike, do you want to bring us home?
Sure. So we've got a couple questions, and since we've got just a few minutes, we'll start with a question. I'll field this one from Dennis about really how do you sell next-generation manufacturing while getting employee buy-in, and how does this fit into an organization with Lean and Six Sigma established for multiple years? This question we can't possibly do all the service to, but I'll give you a couple thoughts. And the first one is, when it comes to digital operations, I really see this as the final convergence, or the ultimate convergence of Lean and Six Sigma. So if you practice Six Sigma and you practice Lean, Six Sigma is a bit more reactive and retrospective. Lean is a bit more of anticipation. When you have real-time information, high-quality real-time information, digital operations is the ultimate supplement to these two things and can really bring it together. So I think it's a massive enabler. On the labor implications, though, we should be very realistic about this. There are labor implications, and the future of human capital in a more digitally enabled operational environment usually translates to lower labor cost per unit. Now, the trade-off here though, is this may end up ushering in a manufacturing renaissance that we've been anticipating for many years now. It has never quite fully emerged. So the labor cost differential that Becky talked about earlier is still pretty wide. And I think it's a matter of getting efficient in high-cost regions enabled by digital operations may, in fact, spur the growth that offsets that kind of labor cost per unit decline. So, long story short, getting buy-in from the people, I think there's a lot about digital operations that makes jobs easier on the shop floor. It allows people to be more productive. What does that mean? That probably will translate to fewer heads, but at the end of the day, it might translate back up as reshoring occurs due to better capacity utilization, lower product costs, and all this other good stuff that comes with step-level improvements in productivity. Hopefully that answered the question, or at least provided some fodder to mull it over further.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time for today's session. I'd like to thank Jon, Mike, and Becky for an outstanding presentation. We'd also like to thank Epicor for making today's webinar possible. On behalf of Industry Week, have a great day.